I'm Ed Kelley, editor of the Oklahoman. With me from Washington is Chris Casteel, chief of the Oklahoman's Washington Bureau, and Mark Green, national editorial writer for the Oklahoman. Both men are frequent contributors here on News OK TV. Okay, guys, let's talk about energy production, particularly production of corn-based ethanol, a staple in some parts of farm country. There's been a lot said and written recently about a global food shortage, and ethanol production is getting some of the blame. Is that fair?
Well, Ed, I think that it's probably the link between corn ethanol production and food shortages is very tenuous at best. I think it's safe to say that corn ethanol production is causing an impact on food prices. And that would be because, obviously, the kind of corn that is used to produce ethanol normally would be devoted to livestock feed, cattle,
right,
hogs, chickens, all kinds of animals eat that stuff. So as more of that goes into production of ethanol, there's less of it or it makes the commodity more expensive for the people trying to feed their livestock.
Right.
Yeah, that's why corn growers here in the U.S. vehemently deny any link between the increased use of corn for ethanol and any kind of world food shortages. They point to weather problems, droughts in Australia and other countries for the shortages. There is a concern that the ethanol market worldwide may cause some crops, some shortages later on. But right now, I think, as Mark said, that link's been pretty tenuous.
Okay, all right. Chris, you've reported just this week that Senator Jim Inhofe of Oklahoma has gotten into this ethanol act by calling on Congress to repeal mandates to increase ethanol production. Do you think his demand is likely to gain any kind of traction in Washington?
I don't think it will anytime soon, just because, as we said, I think the link between the food shortages there's no empirical evidence for that. And he's also making some environmental arguments about it, the amount of energy it actually takes to produce ethanol,
right,
the amount of water it takes to produce ethanol for very little, quote, greenhouse gas benefit, if any. But this mandate that he's talking about was just passed in December, and so I don't think there's any rush to revisit it. Now, they're in that bill where they did increase the mandate for grain-based ethanol use. They allowed the EPA to waive the mandate for certain reasons, and already Texas Governor Rick Perry is asking for a waiver of that mandate. So we'll see how the EPA responds to that, but the Bush administration doesn't seem to be forwarding any kind of arguments now that ethanol is creating any problems.
Okay. There's food riots in some parts of the world, and there's plenty of frustration here in this country over the record rise in gasoline prices. Do either one of you get a sense that Washington is going to act quickly enough to really satisfy people in this country that the nation's capital really cares about these issues?
Well, Washington acting quickly is not what Washington does normally. The major proposal that might have some life, maybe have some chance of action, is actually being made by Senator McCain and Senator Clinton to waive the federal gas tax this summer and give motorists a little bit of break in the summer.
Right.
But it's pretty much seen as a gimmick-type proposal, and again, given the kind of inertia that usually governs here in the nation's capital, it's not likely even something like that will go through.
Well, as President Bush said at his news conference the other day, if he could wave a magic wand and do something about energy prices, gasoline prices, he'd do it. But I think they all recognize there's nothing they can do in the short term to impact what's a fairly complicated system of how those gas prices get set. They each have their own ideas about the medium and long term, but there's no consensus between the two parties on that, and they really just want to argue the positions that they've taken for years, and probably little will happen until the next administration.
Okay. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Mark. Stay here on NewsOK.com for coverage of this continuing story.